The sun was high and bright above the great stone courtyard. Soldiers in silver armor stood in lines, their spears shining as the light hit them. The air was silent except for the sound of boots and the faint wind. People watched from the far edges, waiting to see what would happen next. Queen Alira walked forward with calm steps. She wore armor that looked both strong and beautiful, and a crown rested on her head. Her eyes were sharp, and her face showed no fear. She was known for her strength, and even her guards respected her deeply. Her daughter, Princess Leora, stood a little behind her. The girl was young, with short, bright hair and wide, curious eyes. She held her hands together as if she was trying to stay calm, but her gaze was restless as she looked at the man who had just entered the courtyard. The man was Daniel Cross. He wore a soldier's uniform, not of the Queen's Guard, but of another land. He walked with steady steps, his face serious but not cold. He'd seen many battles, and his body carried the signs of years of service. When he stopped before the Queen, he bowed his head slightly, not out of fear, but out of respect. The Queen studied him. There was something about his presence that unsettled her. He did not look away when she met his eyes. It was as if he carried a truth that could not be hidden. Before the Queen could speak, Princess Leora suddenly broke into a run. Her small shoes clicked against the stone as she rushed forward, and then she stopped in front of Daniel. The entire courtyard gasped. The soldiers shifted uneasily, unsure if they should step forward. The Queen froze, her hand lifting slightly but then falling back to her side. "Father," the little girl said, her voice soft but clear in the silent courtyard. She reached for Daniel's arm, holding it tightly as though she had always known him. Daniel's face went pale. He looked down at the girl, his lips parting as if he wanted to speak but could not. His eyes moved from Leora to the Queen, and in that moment, his silence spoke louder than any word. The Queen's chest rose and fell, her breath suddenly heavy. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in many years, her voice shook. "Why?" she said slowly, her words breaking through the silence. "Does my daughter call you father? Human?" The soldiers exchanged glances. Whispers began to spread across the courtyard. The crowd at the edges leaned forward, their eyes wide. The tension grew heavy, pressing down on everyone present. Daniel looked at the Queen. There was no anger in his face, but there was pain, deep and hidden. His lips tightened, as if he held back words he was not yet ready to say. Princess Leora clung tighter to him, her small face lifted with trust and innocence. She did not understand the storm her words had brought, only that the man before her felt safe. The Queen stepped closer, her armor clinking softly as she moved. Her eyes searched Daniel's face, as though she could pull the truth from his silence. He did not move away, nor did he push the girl aside. He stood still, strong, and yet caught in a moment that no sword or shield could protect him from. The air in the courtyard grew heavy. Every guard, every watcher, every soul present waited for his answer, but none came. Only the Queen's words echoed in their minds. And so the first spark of a secret long buried was struck, a secret that would change the fate of all who stood there. The courtyard stayed silent after the Queen's words. The soldiers looked uneasy, the crowd held their breath, and even the birds that circled above seemed to stop in the air. Everyone waited for Daniel to speak, but he did not. His eyes moved between the Queen and the little girl holding his arm. The Queen's voice grew stronger. "Answer me. Why does my daughter call you father?" Daniel looked down at Leora, her small hand held tightly to him, her eyes filled with trust. He swallowed hard, his jaw tense. Finally he spoke, his voice calm but heavy. "I cannot explain here, not in front of them all." The Queen's face darkened. Whispers filled the courtyard. The guards shifted their feet, unsure if they should raise their weapons. The council members standing behind the Queen leaned close to each other, whispering and pointing at Daniel. Princess Leora looked up at her mother. "He is not bad, Mother," she said softly. "He is kind. He is my father." The words hit the Queen like a blade. She raised her hand, and the guards moved forward, but then she lowered it again. She was torn between her duty as Queen and the sudden storm in her heart. She looked at Daniel with eyes that carried both suspicion and something else, something that seemed like recognition. "You will come with me," she said. Her voice was steady now. "We will speak in private." Daniel nodded once, did not resist. He gently let go of Leora's hand, and she frowned, holding on tighter, unwilling to let him go. The queen stepped down and took her daughter's hand instead, pulling her gently to her side. The three of them walked through the palace gates, followed by guards who watched every move Daniel made. The corridors of stone were wide and filled with banners, each one showing the crest of the royal family. Torches burned on the walls, casting flickering shadows. Inside the chamber, the queen dismissed the guards. Only she, Daniel, and Leora remained. The heavy doors closed, leaving silence between the three. "Now," the queen said, her eyes locked on Daniel, "speak the truth. Why does she know you? Why does she call you that word?" Daniel stood tall. His face showed no fear, but there was sorrow in his eyes. "Many years ago," he began, "I was a soldier in a faraway war. I met a woman who carried a child. I promised to protect them. Battles grew worse, and names were hidden to keep the child safe. I thought I would never see her again, but here she stands." The queen's lips parted slightly. She knew his words were not lies. Her memory pulled her back to the nights of fire and chaos, when she had not yet worn a crown. She remembered a man who had stood between her and danger, who had taken wounds to keep her safe. She whispered, "That was you." Daniel nodded. "I left so you both could survive. I never thought I would be seen again." Princess Leora moved closer to him, her small hand once again reaching for his. "I remember you," she said softly. "You came when I was afraid. You held me when I cried. I know you are my father." The queen's heart ached. Oh. She had buried that part of her life to protect her daughter and to secure her throne. Now, the truth stood in front of her, undeniable. She turned away for a moment, her hands tightening around the edges of her cloak. When she looked back, her eyes were sharp again. "This is true," she said. "Then you have returned at a dangerous time. Many will not accept you. They will see you as a threat to my rule and to her place as heir." Daniel's voice was steady. "I did not come to take power. I came because fate brought me here again. I will not harm you or her. I only wish to protect her, as I once did." The queen studied him. Hush! She could see the honesty in his face, but doubt still lingered. She looked at Leora, who stood between them, her young eyes full of hope. The chamber was filled with silence once more, but it was no longer the silence of confusion. It was the silence of decisions that would change everything. Outside, the kingdom stirred with rumors. Inside, three lives stood on the edge of truth and destiny. The news of what had happened in the courtyard spread quickly through the palace and into the city. People whispered in the markets, soldiers murmured in the barracks, and council members gathered in secret corners. They spoke of the stranger who had walked into the queen's court, of the child who had called him father, and of the silence that followed. Queen Alira sat in her private chamber that night, her crown set aside on the table. The weight of the day pressed on her shoulders. She looked at her daughter, asleep on the bed beside her, and then at the fire burning in the hearth. The flames reminded her of old battles, and of the man who now stood in her halls again. There was a knock at the door. A guard stepped inside and bowed. "My queen, the council demands to speak with you at once." She nodded and rose, adjusting the cloak over her armor. The council chamber was filled with stern faces when she entered. The men and women seated there had served her for years, but now their eyes carried doubt. One of the elders leaned forward. "Your Majesty, who is this man? Why does the princess call him such a name? If his words are true, then his presence is dangerous. The bloodline of the throne cannot be questioned." Another council member added. "The people already whisper. If they believe the child is tied to a man outside the kingdom, it will weaken your rule. Enemies wait for such a chance." The queen listened, her face calm, though her heart was storming. "He is not my enemy," she said at last. "He once saved my life and the life of my daughter. But the truth of his return must be handled with care." Some council members pressed further. "He should be imprisoned. His silence and his past make him a risk." But Alira raised her hand. "No. He will remain under guard, but not as a prisoner. I will judge him myself." The council fell into uneasy silence. Daniel was kept in a guarded chamber that night. He sat near the window, looking out at the torches that lit the walls of the palace. His thoughts were heavy. He had not wished to return to this place, but fate had drawn him back. He thought of Leora's small voice calling him father, and it stirred something in him that no battle had ever done. The next day, the queen called him to walk with her in the gardens. The guards followed at a distance, but the space between them allowed quiet words. She spoke first. "You understand the danger you have brought? Your presence could tear apart the peace I have built. The council does not trust you. The people may turn if they believe you threaten the throne." Daniel walked beside her, his step steady. "I do not seek the throne. I do not seek power. I came only to keep her safe. I promised long ago, and I will not break that promise." The queen stopped, her hand resting on the edge of a marble fountain. Water trickled softly, but her eyes were hard. "And yet she knows you. She trusts you in ways she has not trusted anyone else. That bond cannot be hidden. It will grow, and the world will see." Daniel looked at her. "Shh. Then let the world see not a threat, but a man who stands beside her. I have fought all my life. I can fight again, not for myself, but for her and for you." The queen's chest rose slowly with her breath. She turned her gaze away, but not before he saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. That evening, the kingdom faced its first sign of unrest. Riders came with word that rival lords had heard the rumors. They gathered forces at the border, ready to strike if the queen's rule appeared weak. The council argued fiercely. Some wanted to send Daniel away at once to remove the cause of the whispers. Others demanded he be used as a soldier in the defense. The queen ended the argument with a sharp voice. "He stays. If war comes, he will fight. And we will see if his loyalty is truth or lies." Daniel accepted without hesitation. As night fell again, Leora found him in the corridor. She looked up at him with trusting eyes. "Will you stay?" she asked softly. He bent down to meet her gaze. "Yes, I will stay, no matter what comes." And in that promise, a bond grew stronger, even as shadows of war gathered beyond the gates. The sound of horns shook the city at dawn. Riders came from the north with news that enemy forces had crossed the border. The rival lords had gathered their men and marched with speed. Their banners were seen from the hills, and their numbers were great. Fear spread through the streets, and the people whispered that the kingdom would not stand. Queen Elira called her council and her generals at once. They gathered in the great hall, maps spread across the long table, candles flickering against stone walls. Soldiers hurried through the corridors, and the air carried the sharp smell of steel and sweat. Daniel stood near the table, his hands resting on the edge. He listened as generals argued. Some shouted that the walls would hold. Others warned that the enemy was too strong. The council turned on Daniel, their voices sharp. "It is his fault," one of them said. "His presence caused this. Send him out to the enemy and they will leave." Another voice rose. "He is not one of us. He should not be trusted with command." The queen's voice cut through the noise. "Enough." Her eyes swept the room. "We do not hand over men to buy peace. We fight, and he will fight with us." The council fell silent. None dared oppose her final word. Daniel met her gaze and nodded. He did not thank her, for thanks were not needed. He would prove his worth with action. Preparations for battle filled the day. Soldiers sharpened their blades, arrows were stacked by the walls, and horses were lined in the stables. The people of the city hid behind gates, their prayers rising like smoke. As night came, Daniel walked along the walls. The air was cold, the sky heavy with clouds. He felt the weight of eyes on him, soldiers watching to see if he would falter. But he walked steady, his steps sure. Princess Leora found him once again. She had slipped away from her chamber, her small feet quiet on the stone. She stood beside him, looking out into the dark fields beyond the walls. "They will come soon," she whispered. "Yes," he said, "but we will be ready." "Will you protect her?" she asked, meaning her mother. Daniel looked down at her, then back at the city. "I will protect you both. That is my promise." The sound of drums began at dawn. The enemy had arrived. Rows of men filled the hills, their armor dark, their banners high. The ground trembled under their march. The queen stood upon the wall, her crown gleaming in the weak light. Voice rang out over her soldiers. "We hold this city. We hold our people. Stand firm, and no blade shall pass." Cheers rose from the soldiers, though fear was in their eyes. The battle began with arrows. The sky turned black with them as they flew across the fields. Shields lifted, men shouted, and cries echoed against stone. Soon the clash of steel followed as ladders struck the walls and men climbed with blades drawn. Daniel fought at the gates. His sword cut through the enemy as if it were a part of him. His movements were quick, each strike measured, each step taken with purpose. He fought not for glory, but for the promise he had made. The queen watched from above, her eyes never leaving him. She saw him shield soldiers, push back attackers, and stand firm when others fell. His loyalty showed not in words but in blood. At one moment, an enemy blade struck toward Princess Leora, who had been hidden near the queen's side. The attacker had climbed higher than the guards had seen. Daniel's eyes caught the danger. With no thought he rushed, throwing himself between the blade and the girl. The steel cut his arm, but he struck down the attacker before the blade could fall again. Loud shouts followed as guards pulled Leora back to safety. She cried out his name, but Daniel only nodded once, his face steady despite the wound. The battle raged until the sun began to set. The enemy pressed hard, but the walls held. Every man fought with the strength of desperation, and Daniel was at the heart of it. When night fell, the enemy pulled back. Fires burned on the fields, and the cries of the wounded filled the air. The queen stood in the courtyard, her soldiers gathering around her. Their armor was broken, their faces dark with dirt and blood, but their eyes were alive. Daniel stood among them, his arm wrapped in cloth, his chest rising with tired breath. The queen looked at him, and for the first time her face softened. She had seen his loyalty in fire and blood, but she also knew the war was not yet over. This was only the beginning. The night after the battle was long and heavy. The fires on the fields burned bright, and the cries of the wounded reached into every corner of the city. Soldiers lay in the courtyards with bandages wrapped around them, and the people moved quietly, carrying water, bread, and prayers. Daniel sat on a bench near the gates, his arm bound tightly in cloth. His face was tired, but his eyes were sharp. He had fought all day, and still he remained strong. Every man who passed him gave a small nod, a sign of respect that had not been there before. Queen Elira walked among her soldiers, speaking to them with calm words. She praised their courage and promised that their sacrifices would not be forgotten. When she reached Daniel, she stopped. Their eyes met, and for a moment there was no sound between them, only the weight of what had passed. "You saved her," the queen said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "I only kept a promise." Princess Leora ran to him then, her face pale, but her eyes bright. She hugged him tightly, her small arms clinging to him as though she feared he would vanish again. "Do not leave us," she whispered. He placed his good hand on her shoulder. "I will not leave, not now." The next day the council gathered again. This time their voices were not filled with anger, but with unease. They had seen Daniel fight. They had seen him bleed for the kingdom. But their fear of what his presence meant had not left. One council member said, "The people now speak of him as if he is one of us. Some even call him a hero. But if the princess claims him as her father, what will it mean for the crown?" The queen looked at them with steady eyes. "It will mean truth. And truth is stronger than any lie we could hide behind." The council fell into silence. None dared argue against the queen's words. Later, in the quiet of her chamber, Elira stood before Daniel. The firelight touched her face, and for once her eyes were not guarded. "I tried to bury the past," she said. "I thought it would keep her safe. I thought it would keep the throne safe. But she has always known you. She called you father before anyone told her. I see now that I cannot deny it." Daniel stood still, listening, his face calm but filled with deep emotion. "You are her father," she continued. "And though this truth may cause storms, it is better than living in shadows. If the kingdom must judge us, let it judge us with honesty." He nodded. "Then I will stand with you. Ever storms come, I will not run." The next day, the queen called the people to the courtyard. Soldiers, merchants, and families gathered under the bright sky. Whispers filled the air as they saw the queen standing with Daniel and Princess Leora. Her voice rang out clear and strong. "You have all seen him fight beside you. You have seen his courage. You have seen him bleed for us. Now you must know the truth. He is no stranger. He is part of our blood. He is father to my daughter." A great silence fell. The people looked at each other, at the queen, at Daniel, at the child who stood between them. Then slowly voices began to rise. Some spoke with shock, some with doubt, but many with respect. Soldiers lifted their swords, striking them against their shields in support. The sound grew louder, echoing against the stone walls until it rolled like thunder. Daniel did not bow, but he lowered his head in respect. The queen placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder, and the three of them stood together before the kingdom. That day, a new chapter began. The whispers of fear turned into words of loyalty. The queen, the child, and the soldier stood not as strangers, but as a family bound by truth and courage. And though enemies still waited beyond the borders, the kingdom was no longer divided. It was united by a bond that could not be broken. The queen had once asked in shock why her daughter called him father. Now she knew the answer, and the world knew it too.